Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessen. This is Colorado State of Mind. This week, fire news has engulfed the attention and concern of all Coloradans, and we're set to talk about not only the present situation, but some interesting big-picture angles put together in a new investigative story by the iNews team. Our guests include a reporter and videographer on the iNews story, Michael Kotis and Carolyn Moreau, who are working on a book about the global increase in wildfires. We also have George Greenwood, a wildfire mitigation specialist and former battalion chief in the Left-Hand Fire Protection District, and also reporter Nathan Heffel of KUNC Radio, who's been covering the High Park blaze over the past 3 weeks. That long-running fire in northern Colorado became the second largest in state history in terms of acreage and one of the most destructive ever in terms of homes destroyed. But it's only one of the fires now burning. Late Tuesday, the Waldo Canyon in southern Colorado suddenly doubled in size, forcing the evacuation of 32,000 people, including in West Colorado Springs and near the Air Force Academy. If it seems to you that there have been a lot more wildfires in recent years, you're right. The iNews investigation found that the number has exploded during the past decade. According to the Colorado State Forest Service records, in the 1960s, say, the state averaged 460 fires a year. But in the past decade, the average has shot up to 2,500 per year. And we will get more details and talk more about that and about how more people than ever are living in Colorado's so-called red zones. But let's start out with the snapshot in time on this Wednesday when we're taping. Nathan, if you will, give us the rundown of these major fires and the kind of resources that are being used to fight them.
Well, there are multiple fires burning through the state of Colorado. You know, as of Wednesday, we can talk about the big three. You have the High Park fire in northern Colorado. You have the Flagstaff fire in Boulder, which is getting close to the city there. And then, of course, the large fire, the Waldo Canyon fire, which continues to burn nearly uncontained, about 5% as of Wednesday. Over half of the United States air tanker fleet for the U.S. Forest Service is flying over Colorado trying to create containment lines around these fires. The military has actually even called up 4 of their 8 special C-130s, their MAFs, which are equipped with special fire retardant systems that can be loaded into the planes. They're also being used. And that's a rare event typically because that happens when all of the air tanker fleet is in service or unavailable. And that fleet itself is quite small, so with all the planes coming in, it's been quite an experience. In terms of firefighters, up in the High Park fire, nearly 2,000 firefighters were fighting the blaze, and they're starting to move to other places, to Boulder and down to Colorado Springs, as that fire, the High Park fire, starts to come under control. As of Wednesday, about 66% containment. But again, that fire destroyed nearly 250 or more homes in a matter of just days. So it's been a very active fire season, and it's very early in the season.
It is early. And we know, of course, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper has been all over the map, literally, trying to take a look at these fires. And then, as of Wednesday, we learned the president would be coming on Friday.
That's right. He'll be traveling down to the Waldo Canyon fire and touring that area in Colorado Springs, and that was announced. So,
all right. Well, it's a kind of frightening time, and I think everybody else feels the anxiety of it, just because of this weather and the wind and the hot temperatures that we're experiencing. Michael, you, of course, were starting to write about wildfire long before this fire season started, and part of what you decided to focus on is why we have seen such an increase in the number.
Yeah, we have probably 3 broad categories of causes to the increase in wildfire. One is climate related, and particularly this year in Colorado we have a very thin snowpack, and that means that the timber country, the high elevation forests, are incredibly dry and dry a lot earlier than they usually are. And this has become more common throughout the West. In some areas of the West, studies show that the fire season is about 2 months longer than it used to be, largely due to the fact that snows are drying up earlier and streams and creeks dry out earlier, and consequently the forest is flammable earlier in the season. Another cause of the increase in wildfire is development, and we've seen a rapid expansion of population into flammable landscapes, and not only are those people and resources that are at risk, but they also have a big impact on the fire's causes there. You know, a lot of areas that used to have no human-caused fires now have mostly human-caused fires, and we've seen a number in the last week, a number of fires, large and small, like the Estes Park fire that broke out last weekend and destroyed, I believe, 22 homes outside the national park, which was caused, they believe, by an electrical wire blowing against a tree until it got bare and ignited that tree.
iNews' Bert Hubbard crunched the numbers. He says 1 in 4 people now lives in one of these so-called red zones. Explain what a red zone is.
Well, a red zone is effectively part of what firefighters call the wildland-urban interface. It's where development and homes press up against the forest. And in the case of the red zone, these are areas where people are living adjacent to forests that are very flammable, either because they are naturally very flammable or because they're unhealthy. A lot of our ponderosa pine forests are badly overgrown. In other areas we have serious infestations of mountain pine beetle or dwarf mistletoe that have affected the forest. So the red zone is basically where we have people and resources at risk from forests that are as flammable as they can get.
So Carolyn, you and Michael have been traveling in these red zones, right?
Well, Michael and I have driven around Colorado quite a bit, talking to people who have moved up into these areas or have lived there a while. And the type of person who does it, I mean, they all love the forest. That's why they move up there. They love the tranquility, the peace. I'm a city person, so I've never lived up there. My impression that you should be able to go live in a forest and it takes care of itself. You don't have to shovel, you don't have to do anything. I was stunned at how much work people have to do to actually mitigate their properties and protect their homes from potential wildfires.
Let's take a look at some of the video that you took.
This summer, Tony Mahn's fire mitigation company was hired to clear a few beetle-killed trees around this home in the foothills above Fort Collins. But, in a scenario that's all too familiar for Mahn, the property owner skipped further mitigation work that would have cleared flammable brush from behind the home. 3 days later, Mahn, who lives in a Fort Collins suburb, woke up to learn that the massive High Park wildfire was burning the area. Hundreds of homeowners were being evacuated, including the entire neighborhood where his crews had been working.
You know, we know hundreds of folks up there that you hope are in a good spot.
From his 8 years of doing fire mitigation work along the Front Range, Mahn knows from observation that the majority of homeowners have not taken steps to protect their homes from wildfire. A big reason, he says, is cost.
We started solely in mitigation a year after the Hayman fire, and then the last 3 or 4 years has been largely mountain pine beetle. We're finding by and large, when folks are spending a large amount of money on one, we have a hard time getting them to, do some of the other details regarding their D-space.
Mahn watched with concern over the next week as the High Park fire spread, eventually becoming the most destructive wildfire in Colorado history. But there was nothing he could do for his clients already under evacuation.
We never had a fire moving nearly that rapidly in Larimer County. The old saying, can't wait till the smoke is in the air.
Around Colorado, an increasing number of people are living with the danger of seeing that smoke. An iNews investigation found that in the 10 years since the Hayman fire, the state's biggest wildfire on record, more than 100,000 people moved into Colorado's high-risk red zone, areas where development abuts the state's most flammable forests. In all, about a quarter of Colorado residents are now living in areas prone to explosive wildfires. Ellen Bozell moved to the mountains above Fort Collins 4 years ago, building a house in the same neighborhood where Mahn's crew had been working.
Very frightening, very scary.
Has that changed your feeling about where you live?
It has. If our house burns down, we won't rebuild up there.
Please.
Okay, thank you. And it's so dry right now that it's like popcorn up there. I mean, if somebody throws a cigarette out their window, it's going to go up.
Such conditions are becoming all too common in Colorado and across the West. Steve Brown was a rookie volunteer firefighter when the Hayman Fire roared through his district near Colorado Springs. Today, he's the fire chief, and that's not the only thing that's changed.
Now our fire season really is almost year-round. Used to be, we had to start worrying in March, and then by the monsoons in August, we were done. Not anymore. We're getting wildland fires every month of the year.
And that's the video from our guests Carolyn Moreau and Michael Kotis. I'll turn now to George Greenwood, who has worked for some time in this area of fire mitigation, helping communities plan how they're going to deal with this and avoid wildfires. Why is there so much to mitigate all of a sudden?
Well, as Michael pointed out, our forest conditions have changed drastically over the last 100 years with suppression, constant suppression of naturally occurring wildfires. So we have more fuel. Climate has shifted. We have hotter, drier weather and extended fire seasons. And it seems about the year 2000, this country kind of woke up around that there's a significant risk for communities that are positioned in these fire-prone areas. And that was about the time that we started seeing the National Fire Plan come into play, that really attempted to put some money into solving the problem, but it was kind of, they weren't involving the communities so much. They were throwing money at resources, but there wasn't really so much community interaction. And with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, the concept of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan came into conception, and that brought the millions of dollars that was available through the National Fire Plan towards communities that would actually put together a strategic plan on how to mitigate. And that came, there was mitigation planning going into that, but there was a lot of community education, a lot of outreach to teach folks that were already living there that they can make a difference and impact in their fire risk or their hazard. The forest conditions could be addressed on a house-by-house basis. We could develop mitigation plans that address the forests around the communities.
And how are people reacting to that? As you went to these public meetings and tried to educate people in that, Carolyn, of course, has pointed out what a big commitment it is to
it is.
Keep your house.
There was a mixed reaction because people, a lot of folks that move into the mountains have moved there because they don't want to be bothered. And there's a lot of that attitude that prevails, and they come armed to these community meetings. It's like that they're there they've always wanted to talk to the sheriff, and they've got a beef with this agency or that agency, so they'll come with that. But there's a lot of folks that want to come to learn how they can save their homes.
What do you guys think? There are going to be some changed minds, I would think, with all the fires we're seeing now.
Well, in my reporting, I've talked to some people, especially during the fire in Conifer, that they were worried they had to evacuate. But this tree's been right next to my house for 20 years, and it seems to me it's a very interesting point where they know they're in a risk area, but they don't feel the need to mitigate or don't feel like they can mitigate because of some, either a personal feeling or things like that.
That question gets asked all the time. I've got the tree that I want to keep, and the message is you can treat that tree as a house and create defensible space around that tree. But the big thing is flammability of the house, flammability of the structure, and then ornamental shrubbery around the house. If you can clear that and you can reduce the flammability of your house, you actually have a fighting chance.
During my own reporting at the site of the Lower North Fork fire, we spent some time with a couple there who had mitigated and put a lot of time into mitigations. They had an insulated concrete house and metal roofs, and they'd cut down hundreds of trees and buried their propane tank, which that's quite a ways to go to protect your propane tank. And their house was still destroyed. And they really felt as though there was no mitigation that would have saved their house. And that may speak to another problem that some researchers that I've spoken to recently talked about, that the newer developments are moving higher into the mountains. And so we're moving developments from the ponderosa pine forests, which are naturally fairly sparse, and if you actually make those forests sparse again, those homeowners will face lower intensity fires generally. But the newer developments are moving into mixed conifer and lodgepole forests, which are intended, they have evolved to burn in what they call stand reducing events. And they're not forests that really respond to the kinds of treatments that are done on ponderosa pine forests. So we have a lot of room for development and a lot of development that's going on now in these higher elevation forests that are going to be a different kind of problem and may not be as easy to push back even with the kind of expense we're talking about.
I think another factor in that is that we're seeing fire behavior that we've never seen before. On large project fires, there's always a fire behavior analyst running computer models about where the fire is going to go based on fuels and expected fire behavior from those fuels, topography and weather. And the models are not keeping up with what we're seeing on the ground anymore. We're out on the very edge of the bell curve on expected fire behavior, and even those homes that they look bulletproof, they can be lost just because of the intensity of the fire, the intensity of the wind, and that's always a wild card in fire mitigation. You can do your best, and that home would have survived 10 years ago in a normal fire. But we're not seeing normal fires anymore.
Yeah, two things that I think I've heard at every major fire, and I think I've gone to just about every one this year, and I think I've heard the incident commanders say two things over and over again, and one is exactly what you're saying: this fire is behaving in a way that I have never seen before, and the second one is that this is the fire that we've always feared. So they know that the potential is there for these mega fires, as some people call them, and I think that they are pretty much at the limit of their ability to try to deal with them.
Well, I think it's interesting to note as well, like you were just saying, that the fire that's happening down in Estes Park, I'm sorry, in Colorado Springs, those homes were built directly on the mountain, like right up in that area. It's interesting to note that the public information officer for Boulder has said that the fire is coming towards their area as well, but they have a little bit of a buffer zone, and there may not be that destruction that you saw in Colorado Springs in Estes Park. It's interesting that they see that as well, that they're waiting for that if and when scenario.
Carolyn, I think some of the people that you talked to when you were shooting your video were in those areas that are in the Hyde Park area now, right? Were people defensive about living where they live, or more concerned and frightened about what's coming?
I think it runs the gamut. I think people who experience a wildfire close hand often get religion about mitigation. The people, because I mean, these trees, they seem so safe. What's safer than a tree? It's in nature.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's very difficult for us to imagine it happening to us. For us to sort of evaluate the risk around us when it seems so benign. It's like the avalanche always rips on a beautiful sunny day when you feel beautiful, nice and safe. What really sticks in my mind as far as change behavior are a couple I met who the Hayman fire stopped a mile from their house and they were evacuated for 10 days. They were convinced it was going to burn. And when they arrived home, this is their dream house that they'd built. They'd told the builders, don't cut any trees down, only the minimum trees, because we love trees. They had this driveway going up, and they came home to find a big red tag at the base of their driveway, which basically meant the fire crews went by and said, don't even bother, it's not safe for us to go up and try to defend this property, this will be left to burn. And they got religion, and they have 40 acres, and they have taken out half the trees. A couple thousand trees probably have been cut down. They rake the property.
But that's not normal, is it, George? I mean, you don't find people going to that extent, and that's part of the problem. To what extent is development being, held down and not allowed to move up into those higher areas?
Michael's actually got a handle on the regulatory side of this pretty well, so I'm going to defer to you to answer that one.
Well, one thing, or two things really, are that we face a couple of perverse incentives. in our development patterns. Developments are generally approved by county commissioners or somebody on a very local level, but the fires are paid for. The big fires that we're seeing in Colorado this year are paid for by the federal taxpayer. So since the people that approve these developments aren't going to bear that much of the financial burden, it's very easy for them to approve developments. And I've also found on a more individual level that insurance can be a perverse incentive as well. After the 4 Mile fire, I interviewed a couple of homeowners up there who said, we don't mitigate because we have insurance. And if our house burns down, we've got the stuff we really value packed up and ready to go, and we'll just rebuild. Unfortunately, it only takes a couple of properties like that to offset the mitigations that all of their neighbors do. And so, they are creating a hazard not just for themselves, but for their whole community. The insurance picture may change a little bit. A couple of years ago, Lloyd's of London, the venerable insurer, announced that they were going to include wildfire, and in particular climate forest wildfire, in their underwriting, and some insurance companies have started to follow suit. I know down in the area around the Hayman fire that a lot of insurers are coming and looking at the properties that they're insuring, and if you haven't mitigated or you aren't keeping up with your property, they will leave you a note that we're going to cancel your property if you don't get some work done here.
I've had that note. And it is true that they're getting more aggressive in their assessment of who they're covering. And I had a very thorough inspection with an agent with a clipboard, and passed, but nonetheless they're looking. And that is probably the most convincing for those that are not willing to do anything. When you have your insurance company say, I'm going to drop your policy if you don't, that's an incentive, if there isn't any other.
You mentioned federal taxpayers, and of course we're looking at all of this equipment and resources that are being used on those front lines. What is that like up there? That's got to be the toughest job
for the firefighters, most definitely. I actually toured the High Park Fire Base Camp, and it was nearing 100 degrees, and these firefighters are up there in oppressive heat, and they come home or come back to the camps for hours, and it's oppressive heat there as well. So it's definitely a very trying experience. Now, I have not yet been down to Colorado Springs, but again, similarly, seeing those images on television and seeing the pictures on social network of people flooding out of their homes and onto Interstate 25, it's been absolutely an amazing situation that we're currently seeing. Unprecedented is, of course, what many officials have said. And typically, fire officials are relatively calm. They don't typically use words like epic or apocalyptic, but you're definitely hearing those words now from fire officials.
Yeah. And we're seeing, as the Waldo Canyon fire showed last night, we're seeing California-type fire behavior where we're seeing structure to structure to structure ignition. Right. And we've not seen that in this state. The entire subdivision's going up at once. And that's a dramatic change in what we've experienced here. Before we run out of time, Michael, let me ask you to put your crystal ball in front of you. What do you see happening as more of this information comes out about how fires have become more intense, there are more of them? Do you see people changing their behavior?
I think that policy is going to change. I don't think that people are going to change wanting to live in the mountains, wanting to live in the forest, at least not at the rate that we're going to need to see that change with what we're facing. But as well as homes going up in flames, we're also seeing budgets go up in flames. So back in around 1990, the U.S. Forest Service spent about $300 million a year fighting forest fires, and the budget for fighting forest fires now is run as high as $3 billion a year. It's gone from taking up 13% of the Forest Service budget to almost half of it. And so eventually the federal government is not going to be able to pay to fight these fires anymore, and we're going to start seeing changes in response to that.
This year certainly has people talking about 10 years ago, 2002, the last time it was so bad and so widespread. What are your thoughts at this point, Carolyn?
Michael and I had this experience in the lower North Fork where we walked through the rubble of a house where the homeowner had done everything he thought possible to protect this home from wildfire. And so we're hearing that they're seeing different kinds of wildfire behavior that they've never seen before. Is it possible that there are some places which you cannot do fire mitigation, or some fires you just cannot protect against. You know, because mitigation is, it's supposed to be a way to live safely in the forest. But what if we can't do that?
And we'll leave it with that rhetorical question. That's Colorado State of Mind for this week. You may see this program again if you go online to video.rmpbs.org, and you may also like to see some of the fire pictures our viewers have posted at our Facebook page. Thank you now to Michael Kotis and Carolyn Moreau, and to George Greenwood and Nathan Heffel for their insights on the ongoing fire situation in the high country. Next week at this time, Colorado State of Mind will be live when we turn our attention to the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling on health care reform. We're interested in getting your questions or comments on that ruling and what it means. You can give them to us at our Facebook page anytime by the end of the day Thursday next week. That's facebook.com/RMPBS. And then join us with our panel of experts on the health reform decision Friday night at 7:30. Thanks for watching This Week. I'm Cynthia Hessen. Good night.
You'll always have people that are going to debate or argue that global warming doesn't exist or isn't an impact. It's really hard to find a wildland firefighter, or at least one that's been working for any length of time, that does not believe in global warming and hasn't seen fire behavior change. Here in Colorado, and really throughout the West, we are seeing such an increase in drought, and drought is so directly related to wildfire that that's there's no debate that that's not had a huge impact.